Welcome to the Lancaster Patriot podcast. My name is Chris Hume. I'm the managing editor at the Lancaster Patriot, a print newspaper serving Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and beyond. If you're not a subscriber, go to thelancasterpatriot.com and subscribe. We deliver our print newspaper 52 times a year right to your door. So check us out if you are not already a subscriber. Well, today we have several stories to cover from Lancaster County. First, we got a short one here, a positive one. And that's 21-year-old Shauna Lucas was presented with a Citizen Commendation Award from the Lidditz mayor, and the Lidditz Borough Police recognized Shauna Lucas, and this is from WHTM apparently on March 2nd. Shauna Lucas was driving and she noticed a 10-year-old on the side of the road looking for help, and apparently the child's mother was unconscious inside her home and the child was the only one who could help. So Lucas stopped, helped the child, called 911, stayed at the residence until first responders could arrive for the mother and other family members could arrive to care for the child. And the Lidditz Police Department said, quote, Lucas's actions played a critical role in caring for the needs of the child and contributed to the successful and safe outcome for the child's mother's medical emergency. So shout out to Shauna Lucas for being a great neighbor and showing love for neighbor in this case. Well, our next story comes from a tweet from Lancaster County's own Congressman Smucker. And yesterday he tweeted this. He said, quote, proud that bipartisan legislation I introduced with Representative Lucy McBath and Representative Gwen Moore to support survivors of domestic abuse was advanced by the House last evening as part of the Securing a Strong Retirement Act. Now, as is often the case with politicians, when they pass or vote on a bill and they focus on one small part of it, in this case the domestic abuse, and who wouldn't want to support domestic abuse victims? So it's kind of presented in this way that, hey, this is a great thing. Nobody would want to be opposed to helping domestic abuse victims, right? But as is often the case, as I said, these bills contain much more than just the talking point that is in this case tweeted by Congressman Smucker. In this case, the bill is a retirement act. In fact, it's dealing with changing some of the regulations related to the retirement. And there's a story from The Hill that says Congress gives IRA perks to high earners in tax bill. So there's much more to this bill than the domestic violence aspect, which I will talk about briefly. But a University of Chicago law professor, Daniel Hemmel, said in an interview that, quote, one should immediately be skeptical of a provision where the giveaway has to be hidden, has to be papered over by this accounting trick. So he's speaking of the fact that this bill changes, and I'm not going to get into too much detail right now about it, but it changes the way that the government is accounting this revenue, changing how they account contributions from a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA. So there's much more to this bill than simply the domestic violence piece, which I want to touch on here. Anytime this is one of the problems we have with our government, is they pass these huge bills, ridiculously long bills that have so many different parts of them, and they're presented as representing just a few parts of the bill. And so if you oppose the bill, then you're viewed as opposing those things, whereas you may just say, this is not a good idea to pass a bill with all these changes, even though I may be in favor of certain aspects of them. And again, so this bill passed, there was only 5 votes against it. So it was like 414 yay votes, 5 nay votes in the U.S. Congress. And of course, one of those nay votes was Congressman Thomas Massie from Kentucky, who, whenever Representative Massie votes no, and he often does so alone. He was one of the few who voted against the anti-lynching bill that was put forth and advanced. Whenever he votes no, you should take notice. In this case, he was not alone. There were 4 others, all Republicans, who voted against this bill. And it's sad that there weren't more Republicans to critique this and challenge this, not simply on the domestic violence issue, which I'll mention briefly here, but also on the other parts of the bill and how it's just another way for the government to try to use an accounting trick to make the books look better. But in the long run, it seems like it's going to actually lead to revenue loss, which is another story in and of itself. So anyway, this bill and the aspect of the bill that Representative Smucker is presenting as a great thing is that it supports survivors of domestic abuse. Now, and he says this, I worked bipartisan legislation here to advance this. And One of the representatives, McBath, said, quote, "A heartbreaking mark of this pandemic has been the increase in domestic and family violence as more families stayed home." First of all, that is the fault of the government. If that's the case, that there's more domestic violence because more families are staying home, that's the fault of the government for shutting down the economy. So it's your fault, and this is not going to solve that. Number two, if you have more domestic violence because you're home more, you have a problem. And obviously domestic violence is a problem, but this again shows that the family, it really is the building block of society. And if you have weak families in a culture, you're going to have a weak culture. A strong family is not going to resort to domestic violence because they're cooped up inside. But the part of this bill that Smucker is promoting and saying is a great thing is that it allows those who have suffered domestic abuse to take out $10,000 from their retirement plan within 1 year of experiencing domestic abuse. And then the amount that the victim withdraws from their retirement fund may be replenished within a 3-year period from penalty-free distribution. So, and of course, there's a lot more to this bill. But I just have a couple comments and questions on this provision. And one of the things they say is, this is from Representative Moore, that domestic violence survivors fleeing danger need all the financial resources available to build a safe future for themselves. So the idea is, those who have suffered domestic violence, domestic abuse, and are fleeing, they sometimes need money, and so they should be able to access their retirement funds without a penalty, which normally you'd suffer a penalty if you pull your money out of your retirement account. I mean, that's the agreement you have with the bank, whoever you're investing with. So normally there'd be a penalty, and they're saying the government needs to force those banks and institutions to allow people to withdraw their money without a penalty. So first question is, how can it be proven you are fleeing due to emotional or economic abuse? Because it lists domestic abuse as more than just physical or sexual, or it says physiological, emotional, economic abuse. And again, I think, while there is a true category of abuse, a lot of these things are, especially in our culture, almost anything can count for abuse. So how do you prove that the reason you left your family, your home, is because of abuse? Because ostensibly these banks and institutions would need some sort of proof, or are you just able to go to your banks and say, I'm suffering from abuse, I want to take out money penalty free? But if true abuse is taking place and it's been proven in a court of law, then why not simply have the abuser pay restitution? Why get involved in the private market and dictate to a bank or an institution what they have to do for one of their clients because of something in the personal life of that client? So again, this is another case of more government laws that we don't need. And it also shows that the American people, both Democrats and Republicans, again, there's only 5 out of over 400 representatives that voted no on this, and probably for other reasons, and I'm not saying they voted against it for this, but the majority of American people continue to believe that it is the government's job to get involved in our private affairs and take care of us. Now, if the government has a role to play in a true case of abuse and violence, that would be limited to punishing those who did evil, and that could include restitution to those who had violence committed against them. But it does not involve, the government's role should not involve telling banks or investment firms, these institutions, what they have to do with the client's money that they already agreed to with that client when that client gave that money to the bank to invest. The family, the community, the church should be the ones helping those in need if these situations arise, and they do, unfortunately, not the government. So I think it's unfortunate that there are not more challengers to this bill, and that leads me to another point that we discussed briefly the other day, that the candidates for the primary elections have been announced, and there is no one running against Representative Lloyd Smucker for U.S. Congress. No Republican, so he's not going to be challenged in the primary, so he'll be on the ballot again in the fall against a Democrat, if someone runs, which it looks like it is Bob Hollister who he will be running against, who's also unopposed in the primary. So I really wish there were more challengers in the primaries. I think every primary election, every single incumbent should be challenged, because they need to have their, feet held to the fire on what they voted for, what they promoted. In this case, this is just one example that a challenger to Representative Smucker could challenge him on some of these things, but unfortunately there's no one running against Mr. Smucker in the primary, so he will again likely be elected by a largely Republican county. So I just wish we had more contenders, and I'm thankful for Mike Miller and Weston, who are running against the incumbents, Ryan Ahmet and Brian Cutler, respectively. We need more of that. We need more people to challenge the incumbents. So anyway, there's much more to the bill than just the domestic abuse issue, which I take issue with that itself, but there's much more to the bill. So if you want to go online, read the bill, it is House Bill House Resolution 2954. So it's either so look up 2954 and you should be able to find that. So that's our second story. A brief announcement, not so much of a story here, but Saturday, April 2nd, trout season starts across the state. Of course, Lancaster County, there's not a significant wild trout population, none at all, pretty much. But we have fish brought in from outside the county, from hatcheries, and from Huntsdale, a fish hatchery, most notably, that stock our streams so that you can fish for trout beginning April 2nd. So put that on your calendar if you're an angler. Well, our fourth story today comes from a blog from Prince Law, from a law firm, and this has to do with Lancaster County because the city of Lancaster is one of the municipalities that joined in filing suit in favor of the city of Philadelphia, saying that they should be able to make different gun laws, whether more strict or just worded differently, different regulations than a broad gun law for the whole state of Pennsylvania. So Joshua Prince, who apparently is a lawyer with this Prince law firm, wrote this blog post, and he said that today, Chief Counsel Joshua Prince, who's speaking of himself, filed an answer in response to the city of Philadelphia's petition for allowance of appeal to the PA Supreme Court and numerous liberal amnesty submissions relating to the Commonwealth Court's decision striking down for a second time the city of Philadelphia's lost and stolen firearm ordinance. So there's a lot to this. If I could try to summarize it, it would be this, that the city of Philadelphia and other liberal municipalities, in Prince's words here, including the city of Lancaster, are arguing that these municipalities, these townships, counties, whatever they are, should be able to create more gun laws than those that simply exist at the state level. And one paragraph from one law site says this, speaking of what is a preemption statute, it says that no county, municipality, or township may in any manner regulate the lawful ownership, possession, transfer, or transportation of firearms, ammunition, or ammunition components when carried or transported for purposes not prohibited by the laws of this Commonwealth. So basically, a city cannot make laws, cannot regulate the lawful use of guns and ammunition if those regulations, they can't make it harder for you to be a law-abiding citizen, basically. They can't make laws that regulate the lawful ownership if the laws are prohibiting things that the state of Pennsylvania doesn't prohibit. So in other words, the law should be uniform across the state. And the concern of gun owners is that if you allow these various townships, cities to have all these regulations, various laws, it's going to lead to problems mostly for law-abiding citizens, because the criminals who are going to use a gun to murder someone, not in self-defense, which would not be murder, but use a gun to commit violent acts, then they don't really care about the various laws in the various counties and townships. But law-abiding citizens who don't want to be arrested for simply having a gun in order to protect themselves, many of them will try to follow all these laws. And once you have various laws in various cities and townships, people traveling throughout the state are liable to face, criminal charges if they break some of these laws. So the powers that be and the liberal side think the solution to this gun violence is to have more laws in different counties and different townships. But Prince and others, and he mentioned some groups that are arguing for gun rights, say, no, this is wrong, and the court has ruled in favor of gun rights, saying you can't make these various laws in various townships, although there's more to come from this, I'm sure. But I have a better idea, and of course it's not my idea, but instead of having the government try to solve the violence problem by more gun regulation, and that's one of the arguments made by the city of Philadelphia, I believe, is that we need these laws which are going to be different than state law because of the increase of gun violence in the city. Instead of trying to deal with the issue of crime in that way, why don't we just actually punish those who commit crime with just punishments, who commit murder or assault with a gun? Why don't we punish them with a just punishment? In point of fact, the punishment shouldn't be more or less because they used a gun or didn't use a gun. It doesn't matter how you murder someone. It doesn't matter if you use a knife, if you use a gun, if you use poison. What matters is that you murdered someone. And this is the same problem with hate crimes. It doesn't matter why you committed a crime against someone. It doesn't matter why you murdered someone, stole from them, assaulted them. That's irrelevant unless it's a matter of self-defense. But if you have, as far as physical violence against someone, but if you have murdered someone, the punishment should be the same, whether or not it could be determined in some sense that you did it because you have hatred against another people group, or you just did it because you had hatred against that person, which you certainly did if you murdered them. So again, the bureaucrats are missing the whole point here, and unfortunately, Republicans often do the same thing and miss the point that the solution to the crime problem is to get back to just laws and just punishments. And again, Pennsylvania, we allow capital punishment theoretically, but we have not executed a murderer in a long time. So essentially, there is no capital punishment in Pennsylvania. And I'm reminded of Ecclesiastes 8:11, which says, "When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, the hearts of the people are filled with schemes to do wrong." So the biggest way that you can encourage crime in your city, in your township, in your state, is to not execute a just sentence against that crime quickly. It has nothing to do with gun laws. It has everything to do with the fact that if you don't execute justice against those who have murdered, those who have raped, those who have kidnapped, then you're going to embolden more criminals to do the same. Well, let's move on now to our hate crime section. And this is one at least a little less violent, if you will, than some of our other ones, but it's still a hate crime. And I would remind you, it's a hate crime because it's motivated not by love, but by hate. And our hate crime for Lancaster County today is a jet ski theft that occurred in Columbia. So Columbia Borough Police Department, they were notified on March 25th that a jet ski Sea-Doo had been stolen from a yard in the 500 block of Manor Street, Columbia, PA. And now they encourage anyone with information to reach out to the police station. So if you happen to see someone in your neighborhood in Columbia or elsewhere that has a new Sea-Doo that appears to be the one that was missing, I'm sure you can go on and get more information from the police department and what it looks like. Contact them. So this is a hate crime. All right, this is a hate crime. Stealing someone's jet ski is a hate crime because it's not motivated by love. If you love your neighbor, you will not steal from them. And in fact, this is a good time to mention to our politicians that if you love your neighbors, you will not encourage the government to steal from them with a property tax and income tax and ever-increasing taxes. But anyway, hate crime is a jet ski theft. Whoever committed that crime had hate in his heart for his neighbor that would inspire him or allow him to go to his property and take his jet ski that person paid for or was given as a gift. Whatever the case may be, they earned that jet ski. And to steal from someone is to demonstrate your hatred of that person and also probably your envy and covetousness, coveting his jet ski. Started with that, I'm sure. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's donkey. You shall not covet your neighbor's jet ski. So a violation here of the 8th and 10th commandment. And the punishment should be restitution, maybe twofold. Give him back his jet ski and buy him a new one as well. That's our hate crime for today. And finally, we go to our one story for outside the county. You probably have heard of this already, but I want to touch on it here. Disney is reacting very, very, I guess I would say strangely, but not strange when you understand the liberal mindset behind these corporations and what they're trying to push, but it's very blatant. So this comes from the Federalist, that Disney, on the heels of Florida's new parental rights in education law, which bars educators from instructing kindergarten through third grade students about sexual ideology, multiple executives and employees from the Walt Disney Company admitted their own personal missions to deluge 5 to 9-year-olds with as much of their sexual ideology as possible. So this is not hidden. This is very clear. You can go online, read the statements, watch the videos. You have top executives and employees with Walt Disney Company saying that our goal is to get more and more sexual perversion. Now, they would not say it's perversion, but it clearly is, in front of young children. And if you have not already given up on Disney, now is a great time to do so. There are alternatives. And I think one of the things we should be encouraged about is that this cultural clash about sexual ideology and the battle between biblical, traditional sexuality and marriage, which really is simply the truth, and the perversion of that, which has been manifested in many different ways throughout the history of humanity. So there are some new aspects of it right now, but the idea of sexual perversion and violating God's standard has been around for generations. So, and we see when we look back at history that those cultures that embraced sexual perversion didn't fare very well. But anyway, there are alternatives to Disney that are cropping up. For example, the Daily Wire said that in response to this, they're going to work on creating their own children's entertainment branch of their company. So, you know, that's one of the things that conservatives need to do more of, instead of just complaining about and even boycotting, create alternatives. And that's one of the things we are here at the Lancaster Patriot. We are an alternative to the mainstream liberal media options. We are offering something different. We're not simply going to complain about the media coverage that occurs in our county, and we're going to, in fact, we're trying not to do that at all. We try just to focus on what we're doing and try to offer an alternative to those other options. So we are providing you with a media experience that is different from mainstream media. So if you have not subscribed to our print newspaper yet, please do so. TheLancasterPatriot.com. We are once a week delivered right to your house, print newspaper, but we have a lot more, and there's a lot more coming. We just turned 1 year. We have a lot of things coming. This podcast is just one part of it. Stay tuned for more. We hope to have a lot more things in the future. That's it for today. I encourage you to seek out those alternatives to, in this case, the liberal slant and sexual perversion of Disney, but also alternatives to media. If you're looking for an alternative to mainstream media, if you're not, if you like to be told the mainstream line and the liberal agenda, by all means, continue with those media outlets. But if you're looking for something different, consider the Lancaster Patriot. Go to our website, thelancasterpatriot.com. Subscribe to this podcast. They'll be posted on YouTube as far as podcast episodes, but also available on your phone, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and online at anchor.fm. Again, my name is Chris Hume with the Lancaster Patriot Podcast. I look forward to next time. Until then, read our newspaper, and Godspeed.